Okay, Rob, it's all you.
Hi, how is everybody? I'm sorry to be so slow in getting to go. It's funny, it reminds me is that to a large extent, I learned how to use a computer on a Viking boat off the coast of Greenland. And I don't know how many of you people remember the old days, but you'd ask one person how to use the computer and they say, oh, it's very easy. You just go dit, dit, dit. Oh, you don't need to pay attention to that, but dit, dit, dit. Well, that shouldn't happen, but dit, dit, dit. And I feel like I'm headed back those days. Um, the year 2000 is, give or take a couple of years, is the 1000th anniversary of the Vikings sailing to the New World. I guess we know within about 3 years of when they did it. I was completely unaware that the Vikings were even in Greenland. They had been there, or they ended up living in Greenland for about 450 years, which is about 25 years longer than the English have lived here in New England. But a guy named Harding Carter wanted to write a book about what it would be like to just take some average Americans and put them on a Viking ship and travel from Greenland to Baffin Island to Labrador and ending up at Lonesome Meadows. And I was lucky enough that he found me. I think he's usually trying to kill me. This was his first attempt at trying to kill me. Um, and the one other thing I always want to remember is that the clothing company Land's End was the sole sponsor of this, which I've been told is amazing that one company will take on such a big sponsorship. But anyways, the Eric the Red, Leif Erikson, what have you, were living in Greenland, and they started to hear rumors about there being land to the west, and they went to explore it. And the ship that we used is called a Canar, which means it's a merchant ship, and basically it looks like a Viking ship except for you don't have the dragon heads. Um, we went and built it here in my shop in Small Point at Herman Island, down. I always say if you miss my shop, your next stop is Portugal. And we had to loft it, which is not how the Vikings would do, but we had to loft it so it would, well, because I didn't have the skills to build this whole thing by eye. This picture you see here are frames in which we will plank the boat around, and which they would not have done. You'll see in an upcoming picture. But one of the things I want to point out here is you'll see this funny little notch over on the lower left-hand side of the screen. And this boat had this strange plank that didn't agree with the rest of the planks. The other interesting thing is nothing held the top of the boat to the bottom of the boat except for one row of fasteners, and I will get back to that. The original boat, oh, here's a picture of, just to show you the keel, that spot here that's black, that's the keel. That's barely a 6x6. And at the very ends where it is attached to the stem and the stern, it is a 2x4. In other words, the size of my palm is all that attaches the bow to the keel. And this is a 50-foot boat that's going to carry 25 tons of cargo, excuse me, and could cross the Atlantic. This picture here is how the Vikings would have gone about it. They would have built the boat over one winter, almost all with green wood, and they would have just set up the keel and the stem and the stern post and started planking lapstrake. And then if they got far enough up, they would start framing it. The only thing that was seasoned was the stem and the stern post. And in fact, the lead shipwright, what have I done? I'm sorry, folks. Let's try this. No, wrong way. Here we go. The lead shipwright was called the stem master. And they have found, if you look at this, this is actually the stern, but if you look at the top of the stern here, you'll see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planks with no fasteners in them. The Vikings actually carved that section and the stem itself out of one piece of wood, and then they would season it. And the reason that we know it is that some of these stems have been found buried in bogs. And the way they know they've never been used is there are no fastening holes cut into it. So these people had enough information that they could carve out these fake plank runs before they even started the boat. My speculation as to why they went about doing this is the Canard is a very full-bowed boat. And even though that the planks where they join to the stem are 7/16 of an inch thick. In other words, on this 50-foot ocean-going boat, the planks at the stem are that's the size of my pinky fingernail. And the planks were amazing. They were they're like a leaf spring in a car. They're fat in the middle and they thin out as they go to each end. The average plank on this boat was 1 3/8 inches, but by the time it got to the ends, it was 7/16. Okay, let's see. Wrong direction. An awful lot of the wood in the boats were natural crooks. The Viking ships were very well designed. They didn't depend on mass. They depended on using the right wood, fabricated in the right method. And so therefore their boats were really rather light. What you're seeing here is a picture of us with a pattern. We took off the lofting to get an oak root and trunk. We had a lot of trouble with that. This rocky soil doesn't tend to really give us a very good run of root in it. Here is a picture of, you can't see his face, but it's Dave Foster. This is the guy I learned boat building from at the apprentice shop back around 1980. And in fact, I was really lucky. I think I had 5 or 6 people who had gone through the apprentice shop, and we all knew Dave, and we all had a lot of fun doing this. What he's sitting on is a floor timber. In other words, it's a frame that will cross the bottom of the boat. You'll notice that half moon shape by his hands, that'll go over the top of the keel. And then all these notches are cut to fit over the planking. And here is the framing of the boat. The bottom piece is these floor timbers that Dave is cutting out. Then you have this relatively straight beam, which will have a knee on each end. And you basically would have framed it after you'd planked it. Yeah. Yep. Wrong way. Why is that? All right. This is a drawing from this book called Havets Heste. Something like Stallions of the Sea. I wish they would translate it. But this is a drawing of how the framing would go in this particular Viking boat, which was common for many of them. And you'll notice how lightly framed it is. The floor, the lowest part of the frames are on 6 foot. Well, all of a sudden I'm having a brain fart. They're on 6 foot centers. I don't think it's 18 inches, so it sure looks like less than 6 feet. And then above that, first, they're a little bit more heavily framed. But like I was saying, where you'll see this lower point of the upper frames, nothing crossed that joint to hold the top of the boat to the bottom of the boat, with the exception of one row of rivets. And here is a mast step, which and their terminology was either the old woman or the old crone. And this is really, at least for the Viking era, the Vikings, when they first started developing mast steps. The early Viking mast steps, when they find one, it's often broken and repaired. Ours was probably in the middle of their their learning curve, and eventually it would come to having a full keelson on top of the keel. Another picture of Dave Foster. We had quite a number of hackmatack knees in the boat, and they're just plugging away at it. This is Mike Brown. You can see him trunneling another hackmatack knee. The only metal in the boat were the rivets on the lap strakes. Everything else was held together with trunnels. And interestingly enough, the boat that we copied, the trunnels were willow. And I don't know if our willow is anywhere as strong or as weak as European willow, but our willow was very weak, and I got nervous. And so I did half the trunnels with willow and half the trunnels with yellow pine. There are somehow, I think the pictures didn't show up of the actual original boats. The boat that we copied, they know was built during the winter of 1027-28 in Sognefjord, Norway. And it was mostly built out of pine. If a boat is built out of pine, it's going to be a Norwegian or a Swedish boat. The Danes would build them all of oak. The reason I bring it up now is the Danish oak boats were all made of oak, with the exception of the trunnel. The trunnel on the Danish boats were willow. And even the wedge in the willow was oak, but the trunnels were willow. Just a picture from the time period of the tools they're using. And we somewhat, as a power planer, where it made sense, we use the traditional tools. Here I'm working on shaping a rudder, hand plane, adze, though in 1800s New England adze, not a year 1000 Viking adze. They rarely use saws. Let's see a picture of a planking. They rarely use saws. The most valuable piece of wood to a Viking shipwright was a plank. It was not a knee. We'll go and spend $400 or $500 to get a hackmatack knee and think nothing about the planking. The archaeological evidence is that the Vikings would destroy knees to salvage planks to be used on another boat. In part, that's because basically they sat there and they split the planks out. It's interesting, the oak planks, you had a tree big enough, in theory, you could get 32 planks, all pie-shaped. The modern archaeologists have found they can get about 20 usable oak planks. The pine was just, you split the pine tree in half and adds away the whole rest of the tree. And so these planks were far more valuable than a small knee that, a little bit of work would get you the small knee. An interesting thing is that the decks of the Viking boats were not nailed down. The decks just went from one deck beam to the next, just laid there. And one of the reasons is it's a good use of plank stock that you have left over. There's also the theory that the boats had to be limber. And by not nailing the deck down, they made them a lot more flexible. The other thing is that if you capsize, what you should do is cut all the shrouds on one side of the boat. The boat will sink. The sail, now that you've cut the shrouds on one side, will pop out and act as a sort of like a sea anchor and cause the boat to roll over. And all your round ballast rocks will fall out, and the decking will not keep it from falling out. And at that point, you hang on to the upside down hull of your boat and watch all your shipmates freeze to death. And if you survive, you move to Minnesota. That was their method of sailing. Just another picture of the bow. And as you can see how the planks they don't come quite up to the stem itself. They jam this false plank. And if you have really good eyes, you can see that we had to go and sort of fabricate this, because you can see the grain is not running. It runs just like a regular plank. We had to fabricate that. We didn't have the time or really the skills to make it the way they would have done it. This picture is a contrast in curves, and basically we are hauling it down on launch day. That big piece of wood you can see on the side there is called the rudder wart, and that is where the side rudder would be attached to the hull. I'm going to speed up a little. Here's launching down at my boat shop in Hermit Island. There's the sails. The sails would have been made out of wool, and the sails would have, well, I'll tell you right now, the Viking boat world is filled with nuts, and which is good. But the Viking sails are made from 2.5-year-old sheep that live on the north side of the island and have never had sex, and they shed their wool so you don't cut it. But that is what a Viking sail is made from. And the Viking sail was worth more than the boat itself and should last about 50 years. I had one thing about sails. Oh, and the fascinating thing is modern archaeologists, whatever, have gone and taken a wool sail, a canvas sail, and a man-made fiber sail and compared them on a boat. And the wool sail will allow the boat to point higher, to point closer to the wind than the canvas or the man-made sail. Or the man-made fiber sail. And the reason for that is that you can't build a shape into a sail like you can with a fore and aft sail made with canvas, made with modern fiber, because at some points one side is going to be the leading edge, and at some points the other side will be the leading edge. but the wool sail will develop a shape. And so they found out that you actually can point higher with a wool sail. And this is the trip. We went and started at Eric the Red's house site, which is down here in southwestern Greenland. It had confused the historians and the archaeologists for a long time because they called it the Eastern Settlement. But we started down here at Eric the Red's house site, sailed out the fjord up to Nuuk, which is the capital city of Greenland, and got halfway across the Labrador Sea and ran into a little bit of trouble, which I'll get to. The solid line is the next year after we took care of our problem. This is a picture of the boat being offloaded in Greenland across the fjord from Eric the Red's house site. One of the interesting things about this part of Greenland is sometimes these fjords remain ice-free in the winter, and they fill up with ice in July and August. And this put us behind schedule because we had to be on a boat that could go in among the ice. This is July. This is somewhere near Eric the Red's house site. And there you can see the ice that we were dealing with. The other thing is we were first learning how to handle the boat, but I know once it took us 64 tacks to go 1 mile. And it took us about 2 weeks to get out of the fjord. Eric the Red's house site is as far up the fjord as you can go. And if you think about it, it's not like Maine where we have an onshore, offshore breeze depending on the time of day. If there's 24 hours of sunlight and the whole interior of the land mass is covered with ice, the wind blows one direction. And it took us about 10 days, 2 weeks to get out of Eric the Red's fjord. Just a quick question, the way we dealt with bodily functions is we started with sitting on a bucket in the bow, and to tack took 5 people. And you were doing all the work right there in the bow. And so if somebody was there taking care of business, you were right on top of them. And so we dealt with that by reading poetry such as Robert Service, or reading from Hervey Garrett Smith's The Art of the Sailor. And here you can see all the ice that was in the fjord in July. More ice. It is out of this world beautiful up there. If you can ever find an excuse to go up there, you should go. The first year we had 12 people on board, and one of them was a Greenlander. This is him right here, Elias C. And he was showing us how to keep the ice away. Is you go and you blow at it and make an away motion under your chin. And that was how you kept the ice away from your boat. This picture is in bad focus. Whenever we showed up into a town, the kids would take over the boat. And here you can see the kids. This was a small town, I don't think 200 people. And as soon as we got there, the kids came on. They brought their, I don't know if that's a puppy or a kitten, on board and took over the boat. And again, like I say, out of this world beautiful. There is this criticism about Eric the Red being a real estate huckster, because he said he'll call it Greenland and people will want to move there. Greenland is green. In the areas that was settled by the Vikings during the summer, it was green. It just didn't have trees, but it was quite lush down in the lower elevations by the water. And here at the end of finally getting to the end of Eric the Red's fjord, We're waiting for the right wind. That is the Captain Terry Moore up in the rigging. And we had to redo our dead eyes 3 times. We hadn't really gotten the stretch out of the hemp rope. We used hemp rope and a manila for the running rigging. The Vikings would have used hemp, and they also would have used walrus hide. I actually found out that if we'd gotten there in February, we could have had all the walrus hide we wanted, because the locals, if they didn't feed it to their dogs, they took it to the dump. Now, I don't think I think we might have gotten in some trouble once we left Greenland, but that is what they did with walrus hide. And I cannot tell you if these people are on watch or off watch. Once you start sailing with the wind, all you need is a person at the helm and a person on bow watch. The first year, all we had to sleep in while we were underway was we hung a tarp over those beams right there. One night in the dark, we were sailing along. So one guy had crawled into a sleeping bag. The rest of us were in our Mustang suits. I can guarantee you I was seasick as could be. And the guy doing bow watch yells to the helm, go right, go left. Oh God, we're not going to make it. At which point the 3 other guys jumped up and God knows what they did. The guy who was in his sleeping bag had managed to roll around on his zipper and couldn't find his way out. So he figured he was already in his body bag. And I'm sitting there sick as a dog. And it's like, well, I'll just wait. And if we hit it, then I'll get up and we'll do something. And if we don't hit it, I'll just sit here and be seasick. I throw this picture in because it's a complete lie. That's me at the helm looking all rugged. I don't know how this picture ever got taken, because I spent my whole trip puking over the rail. And I hope you can notice all the ice, all the snow in July, maybe August in Greenland. This is a typical picture. Is the guy in the blue is Terry. He's the captain. And half the time he's up there, he's looking at the sail. He's figuring out the wind. The first year, we only got halfway across the Davis Strait. 10 minutes, okay. And we failed. The rope, one of the few modern items folding the rudder on, broke. And which is where this hole right by near the guy's shoulder height. And it rolled over the shear plank and broke the tiller off. And we went and, put out a sea anchor, dropped the sail. And the captain says, well, we're not sinking. Let's go to bed until the sun comes up. Well, they had contact with the Canadian Coast Guard, and the only vessel was 22 hours north of us, heading away from us. And once the sun came up, we would be heading away from them also. And the captain of the Coast Guard vessel, the Pierre Radisson, an icebreaker, said no, I'm towing you back to Greenland. At which point we were all pretty bummed out and decided that Columbus was right. One of the things you'll see in this picture, these 2 rudders, is the rudder in the middle is a real Viking rudder, but it's badly shaped. Now, what you can't see like an airplane wing, it's not been done correctly. The rudder on the left has roughly a Viking shape, but it's completely wrong, and it does a beautiful job of steering the boat. And because of the size, it also does a beautiful job of ripping the boat apart. And an hour at the helm and you're done. You can't do it. Whereas the Viking rudder, which we got fixed for the second year, did a beautiful job, fingertip steering under all conditions of sail that we met. As I think he's wearing white pants. We are getting the boat ready, the second year, dealing with the broken shear plank, putting a much larger frame where the rudder is attached, and off we go. And what we did is we spent a couple of weeks sailing up the coast, fine tuning the rudder. We'd sail, end of the day, I'd pull the rudder on board and I'd shape it. A sheet of plywood will steer the boat perfectly, but it's too big. A Viking rudder is much smaller. Naval architect told me it's only 50% the size of what a rudder should be for this boat. But when you get it fine tuned enough, it's fingertip sailing and doesn't put the strain on the boat like the other one did. Another picture of the bow, just because it's so beautiful, I have to keep showing it. Again, Greenland, absolutely out of this world beautiful. You must find a reason to go there. Oars are out. If there was no wind and no current, we could row 1 mile an hour. And you think 1 mile an hour, if you four people, four rowers and a helmsman can move 25 tons of cargo 1 mile an hour, 1,000 years ago, that was a good use. That worked out just fine. We had a number of whales. You'll see the couple of whales over the helmsman's shoulder. This particular large pod of whales swam around us and swam around us and swam around us. I just include this picture to show you how handsome John Gardner is. The second year we had a Dane, and this guy was worth 3 of any of the other people, though I wouldn't tell him that. And we had 4 people share cooking duties, and his was the best cooking, but I wouldn't tell him that either. Get a swelled head. And again, here are the kids treating our boat like a jungle gym. When we had to wait for the wind, we did various things. This was the Viking Olympics in Nuuk, and this is a balance thing that the kayakers try. They're we were very good at turning upside down, but the whole purpose is you're supposed to turn upside down and right side up. Here is Terry, the captain, again, making a kayak paddle while we wait. Doug here is carving the name Snorri in runes into this piece of wood that holds the yard to the mast. I don't know if you can read it, but there's Snorri in runes. Snorri was the best name, as Harding picked this. Snorri, this is a real person. We really know this person exists, and he's the first European child that we know of born in the New World. Some of us were making ditty bags. Here we are making rope for the ditty bags. And there's that damn Dane making a flag, because we didn't have a courtesy flag for when we hit Canada. And there's the mighty Hunter in his boxer shorts with his shoes around his neck, going out to supply food for the trip, which I never did. This is Papa Smurf, also known as Harding, and he decided to do the trip in Viking clothing. And basically what we figured out is that Viking clothing, traditional New England fisherman's clothes, and modern clothing basically keep you the same. They both keep you warm and wet. The modern clothing, the Land's End clothing, keep you warm and sweaty. The Viking clothing, the traditional New England clothing keeps you warm and wet. The one difference is that your wool clothes are going to stay wet forever, whereas the modern fiber will dry. We learned this deadly Greenlandic card game called Kapaka, and by deadly, I mean if the boat is sinking, you'll say, well, how fast is it sinking? Well, it's not that fast, and say, okay, get the cards out. Let's play Kapaka. This is a game you swear the rules are being changed every day. And one of the things is you are allowed to cheat. This is a minke whale that the Eskimos had butchered, and we came up and salvaged a little more meat off of it. One of the things I found out is any large piece of meat that the Eskimos don't take, there's got to be a reason. And when we ate this piece here, I was more than anybody else, I was just sick as a dog. And here we are finally crossing the Davis Strait. I think it took us, it was either 6 or 8 days. If you're sharp-eyed, you'll notice this picture is backwards because the helm is on the wrong side. I think 35 knots is the strongest winds we ever had. And the first half, we had good, strong winds. The second half, it was relatively calm. And that's where we slept, the crossing. And all of a sudden, it became a 4 or 5 person crew because if you weren't on watch, you were sleeping. I think somebody figured out we were probably using up 6,000 calories a day on this trip. I've been told I've got to hurry up. There's a little white dot in the picture there. That is a polar bear. And I think the polar bear smelled our whale meat. And fortunately, they only came over during daylight hours. Rowing 1 mile an hour, no wind, no current. That was the best we can do. One of the amazing places that is an incredible place to moor. If you're absolutely nuts and want to moor in hundreds of feet of water right offshore and have no other options. And finally, the wind came up and we're on our way down to Lonso Meadows. And we were doing an 11.5 knots, which we should not be able to do. That we should have been doing no more than a little over 9 knots. But we were just screaming along, 11.5 knots. Hot, I'm afraid, I wish Terry wasn't cut out because Terry's in his modern clothing, just covered with pine tar. And these guys are looking a bit worn out. And here we are, right in even at the very end, rowing when needed. And I lost something like 40, 50 pounds. I was seasick even on the last day of the trip. But here we are at Lonso Meadows, which is the very northern tip of Newfoundland. And of course, your mom is going to come meet you when you're done being a Viking. And that's my mom. Came up to Lonso Meadows along with a lot of other people to greet us when we got there. Sort of a drawing of what Lonso Meadows probably looked like as a repair area. This one here shows oxen hauling the boat ashore. I didn't have oxen. I had Swedish women. I started off with a bunch of Europeans, a couple of Irish guys, and slowly I managed to scare away all the Swedish men. And it finally got down to just a couple of Irish guys and Swedish women. And when they were getting tuckered, I would just say, damn it, you people are just as bad as Americans. And then they'd start hauling away on it. And there she is. One little last thing to add, and this is a personal thing, is a medical emergency. Is I lost 50 pounds on that trip because I'm seasick. As soon as I hold a glass of water, I need to lose 50 pounds again. And I have a plan. Since we built the boat, the archaeologists in Denmark have reconfigured the boat a little. The archaeologists in Greenland have decided they don't have Eric the Red's house site, that house site, which would have been the best house site, is a couple miles away from what had been thought was. And the archaeologists in Newfoundland will say that is definitely a Viking site, but it is not Vinland. So I need to find some lunatic rich Viking nut, have them build us another one of these boats, and then we'll sail it from here to Greenland. So if you know anyone, I know there are a lot of Viking nuts. Finding the rich Viking nut is my problem so far. And I guess we're ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was amazing. Um,
Hey, listen, I just want to thank you. I got to run.
Oh, you're welcome.
So fascinated.
You're welcome.
Hope to see you again. Bye.
Great. Bye.
if anybody has any questions to ask Rob, send them to me in the chat, and we can finish up with a few questions for him.
Thank you. That was very interesting. Thank you. My first time. I'll come back again. Thank you.
Oh, great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I don't know what happened to my pictures from the original. Is while you're waiting for questions to pop up or what have you, there were 5 Viking ships that were sunk on purpose to block the channel into Roskilde in Denmark so that the enemy would have to wiggle all around. And to stop a Viking ship, you're talking about sinking a boat in just a few feet of water. And they'd filled these boats with rocks and punched holes in them and put pilings through them. And around 1960, they discovered these boats and just flattened. And they developed a lot of the skills of how you preserve wood that's underwater, because wood that's underwater can look great, but as soon as you let it dry, it'll just fall apart. You need to fill the cell structure with a wax. And you should look up the Viking Ship Museum in Denmark, because they've been building all copies of the 5 boats using all Viking methods. I swear they walk around with an axe in one hand and a micrometer in the other.
So Rob, we have a few questions for you. Some people started a little bit late and they just wanted to know, how many days did the trip take and what year did it happen in?
It was we tried in 97 and we probably only had about 6 weeks and failed. And then in 98, we spent the month of June. We spent the month of June fine-tuning the rudder and sailing up the coast of Greenland. And in my mind, the whole trip in the second year was around 90 days. We actually got lucky. When we finally got to northern Labrador, the wind did not blow for 2 weeks. And northern Labrador has mountains coming right to the shore. And so we'd row for one day and then go exploring the next day and then go rowing like that. And but it took quite a while. The Viking rule of thumb is that, some people feel that when a Viking says a day's sail, they mean 140 miles, no matter how long it took. So if you're saying, somebody sailed for 4 days and ended up at his father's farm, they're taking that to mean 4 times 140.
What has become of the Viking ship now?
They, northern Newfoundland, or a lot of Newfoundland, the fishing industry collapsed, and they're very dependent on tourism. And the Lonso Meadows, the one Viking site, is in literally the end of the road going north. And what they did for the 1000th anniversary celebration is they built a Viking village. They already had recreations of what the archaeologists had found. And half a mile away, they built a Viking village. And we went and put Snorri in a big boathouse they built for us.
What kind of food or supplies did you bring along, and how did you store or cook and eat them?
Hiding, when I do a project for Harding, it always has to be as authentic as possible. And as soon as my part of making an authentic boat is done, all authenticity goes out the door. We had all these big plastic barrels filled with food. It was, there was no eating gruel and what have you. But we did we did eat reindeer, and we did actually, the Inuit in Greenland gave us different types of whale meat and what have you. But for the most part, it was just all whatever you take camping with you.
How did you calculate how to make adjustments to the shape of the rudder on the fly?
The original rudder had not been done very well. And after our first year, it was interesting when we first started, the Viking Ship Museum, the Vikings in Europe, they didn't want to have anything to do with us. And in part, it's because there are a lot of nuts out there who will slap something together and go out and drown. And but after we built this boat, and a Norwegian captain saw it, and we did the first year, they were happy with our work. And I went over and I talked to the guru of Viking rudders, and he says it would take him 12, 15 times to fine tune a rudder to get the shape right. It really is sort of like making an airplane wing. The rudder itself balances right on the middle. And if it was absolutely balanced on the middle and completely symmetrical, and the hull didn't prevent it, the thing would go sideways and just drag through the water. So you had to make this rudder that human strength can turn it and human strength can bring it back. And so it really was just, getting it as close as possible to a airplane wing. They have found, this is information from the 1990. They have found something like 29 Viking rudders. Almost none of them are associated with a boat. They'll usually come up in some fisherman's net, but they have had a lot of rudders that they've been able to study.
In your journey from Greenland to Newfoundland, did you hit any pack ice?
Not any pack ice. That first couple of weeks, there was a lot of ice in that fjord. You remember the planking right up in the bow is 7/16 of an inch thick. So it wouldn't have been a good idea to really hit any ice. And in fact, some of the scary ice, I'm trying to remember, was it called Bergy bits? Some of the scariest ice is if we're sailing in the dark among ice, would be something the size of a dining room table. They would just be laying flat in the water and it's dark and you can't see anything. That would have been, I think that would have probably caused us the most damage, because you can always see an iceberg and avoid it. But those little pieces that you can't see.
And this will be our last question for the evening. What does whale meat taste like?
Oh, I'm embarrassed to say that poor whale. I don't remember. The first, we had 2 meals with it. And the first meal was made by literally like scraping the spinal column. The Eskimos had gone and really harvested everything. And so we were, that was like a good piece of, red meat. That big piece I show in the second picture came from what I assume is a gland. And like I say, if they're not even going to take it and feed it to their dogs, and that stuff just made me sick. I'm embarrassed to say poor whale gave its life, and I don't even really remember what it tasted like.
Well, it sounds like you might have another trip you can go on to
Got to. I've got to. I got to lose some weight. It's a medical emergency.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Rob. This concludes our speaker series for the evening, and hopefully we'll see you all next month.
Well, thank you.